Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Srikanth Venkat. I'm with DataWorks, product management, and I own most of the security governance portfolio, so Apache Ranger, Apache Knox, Apache Atlas, platform security, as well as the new Data Studio product. But today, we are here to talk about Apache Ranger and Apache Atlas ecosystem. And we have several partners here who have built very interesting and neat integrations around this. So we want to talk about that and give you guys an idea about the community here and how it's progressing, especially as it pertains to the GDPR regulations. There will be some features that each of our partners here will be showing up. So we'll have, in order, we'll have Balaji Ganesan from Privacera, followed by Greg Goldsmith and Jordan from Attunity, and followed by Sarmel from IBM. So we'll see a lot of very cool stuff. Hopefully, you'll see the progress we have made in terms of how the community is expanded and how different solutions have been integrated with the community projects here. All right, so let's move on. No, it's done. Okay. No, I'll just use this. All right, so the idea here is we'll just give you a quick update on the community, and then we'll dive into each of the demonstrations, and then we'll wrap it up at the end. Ollie will wrap it up at the end with our partner footprint. So starting with Ranger, this is the one slide snapshot of the community. We started with XA Secure acquisition back in 2014. Balaji, who will be our first speaker, was actually CEO of that organization, and then that became Apache Ranger, and we made a lot of progress in the past several years. We are now finally at 1.0 with which will come out with HTTP 3 that sometime next month. We announced the early access of that earlier this week at the conference. Ranger 1.0 has several of these features, so hopefully some of you had a chance to attend the talks given by the committers on what's new in 1.0. We're not going to cover all of that in detail here, but just to show you that we've got a whole breadth of new capabilities that have been added. We've added several new committers over the last year, and we have contributions from all of those organizations in Apache Ranger. So everybody from Microsoft, eBay, Huawei, Pandora, so very, very active community and very broad in terms of different organizations being represented as part of this community. From the Hortonworks perspective, we do have a partner certification program that is run by Ollie's team here, and then we do our own certification in terms of certification with the Ranger and other security components within the stack. And then we have several partners that have been certified on the security front. You also see here the native set of connectors. These are the authorizers that exist today with Ranger. And we also have some partners like Microsoft and EMC Dell who have extended Ranger authorizers to include other non-native Hadoop systems. So that is a testament to our extensibility and flexibility in terms of having other authorization models. Okay. Shifting gears, Apache Atlas. So see all of those logos out there. So they're all contributors. They are pretty heavily invested in those. We have several of those organizations still active with contributions from Atlas. We have about 38 committers. We started out as what is called the DGI initiative, where all of those top 8 logos. The mysterious company out there is JPMC, by the way. So we didn't put their logo yet. So and then IBM joined us about a year and a half ago, and then they are working lockstep with us. You'll hear from IBM folks around how IGC is integrated with Apache Atlas shortly. We have about 38 committers. We have a lot of contributions over the past year from IBM, Comcast, ING, Aetna, different folks around these different organizations. We also have a whole slew of very interesting capabilities that have been added in Apache Atlas in 1.0. There was a talk yesterday. In case you didn't get a chance to attend, please do watch those. We will make all of those available, and please do reach out to us on the community side to be able to provide more insight and engage in the community here. So this is the ecosystem picture again. So in 1.0 in particular, we have a tech preview of the Spark connector. We have a full-blown edge-based connector. We also have a Kafka bridge that has been added. And NiFi was added as part of the prior release in 0.7. and the other connectors have been there for a while. We've also certified several new partners to interoperate with Atlas APIs. One of them will be speaking here, Attunity, recently. And then IBM IGC is listed outside of that bucket because it's we consider the IBM relationship to be very close enough that they're partnering with us in extending Atlas. So we view this as a logical extension of the community effort. So that's why it's shown there specially. So we will have a presentation on how IGC is integrated with Apache Atlas as part of this. So with that, we'll hand it off to our first partner, Balaji Ganesan from.
So thank you, Srikanth. Excited to be here. Thank you all for coming in. My name is Balaji Ganesan, and I'm CEO of Privacera. We are a fast-growing startup focused on security, compliance, governance in the modern data architecture. Close partners with Hortonworks. In fact, as Srikanth said, bulk of the team, we have come from Hortonworks, founders of the Apache Ranger projects. We have leveraged the incredible work Ranger and Atlas community has done, and we are trying to take that to the next level. In terms of the focus areas, the work we do, we focus on 4 aspects in the modern data architecture across Hadoop, cloud, and other aspects. The first part is the ability to connect to data stores, unstructured, structured data, and really understand what is sensitive and not sensitive. It could be restricted, confidential information. So we have a mix of rules and machine learning to really understand and classify data. And we take that information and we can understand what is personal, what is confidential, what is restricted. And then we use that metadata to drive some of the management and monitoring aspects. The second aspect, obviously, is the anonymization of using that metadata to drive anonymizing data while preserving formats. So we'll talk through how we can do that. Privacera supports various schemes, aspects of it. Third aspect is a close integration with Atlas and Ranger on how you can use that metadata now to drive who can access what. And so leveraging the aspect of understanding data and then driving access control is a core part of managing that part of risk and data. And the final piece is the monitoring of, once you've set in place, what are users doing with the data. So those 4 pieces are core to us, and we extend across different data stores. Since this was originally intended as a GDPR, it may or may not be applicable to all of you, but security and privacy go very well hand in hand and together as you start thinking about data. There are key aspects that we would bring into the table. One is the discovery aspect of really understanding, as data is coming in, being able to really understand what is personal data, where is it stored, where is it moving, and being able to have that information. The second aspect is something the term used is in GDPR world called pseudonymization. And you can call it pseudonymization, anonymization, however you want to do it. But taking attributes which can identify an individual and anonymize that. You can still use the data, it's reversible. But once you've taken out references to an individual, GDPR allows, or any other regulation allows you to do a lot more processing of the data than if you keep the raw data. And so that's one aspect we can help you with. And the third is monitoring of what is, if personal data is accessed inappropriately or moved, can we create alerts? So let me give you an example of a typical data lake. How would Privacera fit in? And we'll demo some of the aspects today. So imagine if you have an ETL and coming into a data lake, and then you're creating Hive tables, and that data is being consumed through BI and Beeline, and very simplistic scenario. The first part we do is we can work with your ETL engine, not the ETL engine, but it's Kafka or your own native ETL, is it NiFi or other aspects. We can profile as the data is coming in and discover and catalog sensitive data. We can also, at that layer, encrypt sensitive information, name, social security address, email, or anonymize them. And so the goal is to have the data lake deal with only anonymized data, so as closer to the source as possible, so we can do a near real time. But as we do that, we can push the tag information that we are collecting back into Atlas. So we have a native integration with Atlas. The third step is once the data lands in, you're again trying to follow as the data is being copied and classify that, especially the sensitive aspects of it, and pushing that into the Atlas meta store. And then comes your Ranger and other policies where we are pushed with the Atlas Ranger integration. You can now start thinking about tag-based rules and to control who can access what across different consumption patterns. And that works natively out of the box as Srikanth has mentioned in HTTP. And we closely tied with that story. The fifth step would be some users would need access to the raw value. So you're dealing with anonymized data across different data stores or consumption values. We have plugins, we have UDFs, and we are natively integrated with Ranger. That's when something will show. So if users driven out of a policy may get access to the raw value, and there would be a subset of users, whether it's fraud or claims or other department, they may see the raw data on the fly, but the data at rest is always anonymized. And the final piece is the monitoring part. So if you're able to add in those steps, if you have a cluster, which whether it's on-premise or cloud, it's effectively you can address a lot of security, privacy, and governance compliance requirements that are coming up across industries. So that's one aspect of doing that. Let me quickly introduce some of the concepts that I've talked about. The first is the tag part. Essentially, we are tagging at the field level, at the column level. So we can tag a file with multiple tags, or we can tag a table and a column, and those tags are then propagated back into Atlas. So we have our own searchable metadata store, which is backed by HBase, but all the tags that we are collecting will be pushed into Atlas, which will be a central metadata store. Right? The second aspect is the anonymization aspect, where we have various schemes that we offer. I mean, pseudo-anonymization talks about format preserving. We can enable format preserving encryption, keep the social looking like a social or any numeric or non-numeric value looking like it. Or we can convert a name to something which is alphanumeric, but it is unique. And you can search, you can actually run queries against it, and it's identified, but you're not using the actual value. But you can also, we are going to apply redaction and masking where it's one way, where the data can never be reversed back. So we support various schemes. And if depending on your use case, you may want to choose two-way or one-way anonymization. And some of the policies, again, are driven out of the Ranger integrations, or something called tag-based masking also can be applied, where we can take a tag and apply who can access and get the raw value, or who can actually encrypt data. And so that's a native integration applied with the Ranger. So very powerful way. So you discover tags and you use it as tags for anonymization, as well as access control. The access part is something comes out of the box with HTTP, with the Atlas Ranger integration. So as we are pushing tags into Atlas, you can start creating different policies within the Ranger aspect of not only anonymizing it, but also who can get access to even the anonymized data. Again, driven by tags and driven by metadata. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to showcase a scenario that I showed before in terms of, let me walk through an end-to-end scenario where we are, as the data is coming in, we have tagged and we also encrypted some anonymized values. We have pushed that into Atlas. We'll run through some tag-based policies, and we'll try to de-anonymize. We run some queries on Hive and see what are the values we are getting. Okay. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to do the ETL part. That takes, it's a large file that we have. It's the Hortonia Bank data that Hortonworks team would have used. So what has happened is there is a customer.csv file that we had, and that has information around names, email addresses, location, date of birth, and other aspects. That what we have done is we have applied an ETL aspect of copying that data into an output folder, which is again transformed. But as part of the transformation, we have converted some of the, this may not be very clear here, but we have converted some of the information like email addresses and name into alphanumeric, and we have encrypted that data. And this is the data now that we can now use to load a Hive table. So let's create a Hive table out of this data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this folder, and I'm going to run a query which takes this file and create a Hive table. So essentially, we've taken the anonymized version of the data, and we're going to create a Hive table out of that. What's happening in the back end is we are collecting and tagging information, and both on the landed file as well as the Hive table, where we have created a table called customer, and which has a database called customer, and a customer report is a table. There are various fields that are now tagged in. For example, email address is a protected email, which means it's an anonymized version of the email. But if you go to the raw HDFS folder, you will see that if I choose HDFS here and I can search, this was the input, and this input had person name, email, address. Those are raw tags that we had tagged in. So this indicates that a protected means it's an anonymized version of the tag, so you can always know which data is anonymized just by looking at the tags, and that's summarized. And all of these tags are now then pushed into Atlas. So whatever we have done from a Hive table, this table now moves into, the lineage comes up here. So you've taken the file, you've created an external table out of it, and within that, if I scroll down and if I want to look at a certain column, you will start seeing tags as part of it. So there's a tag called protected email that has gone into Atlas. So as we are discovering data, as we are moving the tags, we are automatically creating that and pushing that to Atlas. So Atlas has the lineage, Atlas has the tags. Now you can start using those tags for control purposes. So in Ranger, if you're familiar, there's a tag-based policies. I can start use those tags for creating rules. So as an example, I have an email protected column, and I have said Joe as a user has access to it, but user Frank is denied, right? So that's one part of it. So let's test that out. I'm going to use Ambari view to log as Frank. And I'm going to run this query in it. So I'm going to just do a select star and see if those tag-based rules are working. So I'm going to choose the database as customer, and I'm going to run this query. And I'm expecting this query to fail because I don't have access to the data, and the Frank doesn't have select permission, or is actually denied by Ranger. But I'm going to switch over to a user Joe, and user Joe is logged in, and I'm going to run the same query as user Joe. So I have a different browser, and I'm logged in as Joe, which is here. And let me see if I can run the same query. So that query should run through because user Joe has access to the data, right? So since it's a big table, I'm going to just focus on specific columns which are interest. So I'm going to just choose some street name, given name and address as the query, and see if we can get a subset of the data. So what's happening here is there are some users, some of the information. Yeah. So some of the information is de-anonymized automatically based on the Ranger access policies. So some of them you'll see in clear, some of them, because Joe has access in the Ranger to de-anonymize data, we have given a tag-based masking rule. So one last thing I would do is, as a consent, I'm going to take out and say, two of the users, Maria and Martin, have taken out consent. And we're going to run a query again and see so Martin and Maria. So it's really, we have gone to the individual level here. And so what you will see is that Martin no longer has the real value anymore. So if you've taken out consent, we can actually make you only use anonymized version of that data. So in effect, so I'll turn over to the next team. In effect, it's as a takeaway, what we can help is a deep personal data discovery. We can help with the anonymization aspect and use the Ranger and Atlas framework to control access, control who can see the anonymized version of the data. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'll be available for questions. Thank you.
So we're Attunity. So we're a company that focuses on historically change data capture and moving data heterogeneously from transaction systems into more modern architectures like data lakes and clouds and streaming. So we look at, so I come from the analytics space and the metadata space, and so, you know, a number of years ago, from the analytics perspective, it was really the need for data lakes was coming out of changing needs on the analytics side, instead of being forced into solutions where the business had to set the requirements before IT started building a data warehouse or report. The demand was kind of overwhelming for more data discovery, where you don't know what you're going to look for. I'm looking for insights. I'm looking to compete on analytics. So switch to a mode where you're looking to capture everything. This coincided with, you know, the rise of Hadoop and really made it practical for the first time to capture everything just in case it was needed later. And so Gartner's words, you know, not mine, but still like the quote. I think it's directionally correct. What we saw is because those lakes were then being created for kind of unknown needs, it really wasn't built for anything. And so kind of the data teams and data consumers got what they asked for. And they said, give us all the information. We gave all the information, but it wasn't really useful because it really put the onus on the consumers then to take that very raw data and do the transformations in the ETL themselves. And there really wasn't a lot of tools that were focused on these specific problems. And lastly, each data consumer needed to do it over and over again themselves because there was no good way for them to trust the data, know where it came from, know what happened. So they were forced to, even if somebody had created kind of a more governed set, if they didn't know where that came from or how it got there, they were forced to go all the way back to the raw and do it themselves. So this is a problem that you know, really comes down to, you know, skills, the right tools, and then lastly, trust. So first I'll talk about the first two, you know, with our platform. And what Attunity does is an end-to-end platform of, historically, we were just landing the data. Then because of these problems we are seeing with streaming and lakes, we moved into moving kind of that transformation down. So we're not a full ETL tool, but there's a lot of things, especially when you're doing change data capture, of the many files. You could end up with millions of files, a file for each change. We've extended our pipeline to include building up a full change history and then allowing these end users to self-service provision subsets of that data that they need. So we're keeping that constantly in sync from like a mainframe system or SAP. Every time there's a change, we move that all the way through to an analytics-ready data set like an ODS or a snapshot. So as part of this process, so as I said, we're not a full ETL tool, but increasingly number of our customers, particularly in Europe, are now using the data lake as a solution for GDPR and taking all the data out of the transaction systems where it might not be fully governed and the data needs to be there. And for any analytics purposes, they're putting it into a data lake and then doing the anonymization and you know, what we just saw in the last presentation using tools like Ranger. Some of them want to physically transform the data permanently to make sure that there's no chance of getting data out. So we can do that. We can also tie into, call out third-party tools to do the, you know, any sort of transformation. But also the key is by using kind of a platform and a tool, you know where that data came from and you know how it got there. So then on the trust side, we've been working with Hortonworks and others on, you know, what we saw as a new manifesto for governance, and we saw some people in the industry seeing, you know, what's really causing the lack of trust. And we really took it to heart as a tool that is really touching the data from the sources and putting it into Hortonworks Lake. It's really incumbent on us, and we really recognized that, realized that we were dropping the ball, and it's up to us to kind of capture that metadata. So we saw ourselves as a data movement vendor. We realized about a year ago that it was incumbent on us to become a metadata movement. Otherwise, what you have is these silos of metadata. So we might have captured the metadata in the lineage in our tool. If we're not sharing it with a tool like Atlas, you're going to have a silo of what happened before Hadoop and what happened in Hadoop, and that's really not meeting the needs of these end consumers to get the trust. So this needs to be unified, and so we've announced this week the kind of the beginning of this process where we are centralizing all the metadata that's essentially pre-Hadoop and the things that have happened in the source, and then we're synchronizing that with Atlas, so then the consumer really has full end-to-end lineage all the way from the source through the consumption. So Jordan will come up and give a demonstration of the platform and then our integration with Atlas and how we do that.
Absolutely. Well, I'm already mic'd up. So thanks, everybody. And one of the things that you look at when you're building different data lakes is the actual patterns of taking in one of the use cases, encrypting the data. We have multiple partners for encryption. We address it there. One of the things I'm going to do, just for the sake of time, is to address a couple of these through images and explain the concept. What we do is we take in real time from a number of different databases. You think of like the Oracle SQL Server, those platforms. In the use case, when you're downloading and you're trying to understand and learn, you'll use Hortonia Bank, the demo that they have. So what I've done is I've taken and loaded into Hortonia, and in Hortonia, I've dumped a number of files into a first Hive table using LLAP. That second Hive table gets transformed in here in our replicate compose tool, which is actually, I guess on screen I'll reload this page, but what's key about the concept that we're introducing is that we're reverse engineering all the details of what's inside your destination, and we're generating Hive and merge, all the details that you have when you're merging all those files back together. But as you're looking at that, part of the metadata, you see this button metadata, we're going to end up exposing that metadata and dumping it into our Enterprise Manager tool. I have a number of different customers. I see a couple in the room right now. When we're taking all this metadata, we're capturing it and we're loading it into our backend database. If anybody remembers Affluent and then now Attunity Visibility, now into AEM, the history of our tools, we've been profiling the usage pattern, the chargeback, the detail of how people use DB2, Netezza, Teradata, your Oracle Exadata, your SQL servers. We're profiling how you're querying, capturing the actual SQL statements on that source. Because we have the elevated rights in the way we deploy in, it makes it very significant. So at the tool level, what I have is the ability to expose metadata about that application, that tool itself. And what I'm showing you is the way, and I think this is taking too long to load, so I'm just going to pick this one up. But what it's taking in is it's capturing, it's good old internet. So what's problematic here is I'm showing in our tool, in the metadata, I've got all these different components that I'm capturing. Let me pull open the metadata. So in operations, you go to metadata. Okay. So what I've got is the actual task itself. Actually, here's the Hortonia Bank, so I'll click on this one. So all the different tasks, it's capturing the lineage for that data set. So go to data set, you've got the number of rows, you've got the lineage, and this is not just for Hadoop, this is your ecosystem. We have a lot of customers that want to be able to capture and carry all that back. But as we've stored all this metadata, I ran a single task and loaded it to an Atlas instance. So there's Atlas right there. And that same metadata that you require to do the lineage from Hortonia gets dumped right here. So here's the customers. So the same impact analysis you see here, you're getting the same stuff in our tool. So that's your entire enterprise. All your databases at source, now you've got analytics. And I think you guys are next, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. But the last part about this is what's significant around when I go to metadata and I look at the operations of your database, By profiling the analytics tab, it becomes an interesting proposition, especially for this audience. What we have in this analytics is a full profiled set and reporting of how people are using your source systems. So that metadata can be part of the lineage story significantly as you're looking at it. Right here I've got trends, applications. Let's go to capacity planning because this is much more significant. You could literally give the chargeback to then support the offload. Even automating the offload at certain points, like you find some cold storage opportunities, this would generate that overall sequence. So it's all live. So I can literally tell you all the transactions over the past year by how they're running, the volumes, the scale, what you want to run, and indicate performance and all the detail along with the tagging. So this is your source system, now the lineage into Atlas as well. So quite a lot of different functionality here, right? And the level of profiling that gives you that automation, what we did in just a short second when I loaded it, from that UI, we loaded the system, we automated all the access and loads into Atlas, but we generated all the code. There was just clicks, right? There was no scoop writing, there was nothing there that required you to do anything significant. It was all very easy to do. So a couple hundred tables very quickly. I'll let IBM take over, and thank you.
Hi, can everyone hear me at the back? All right. So my name is Samil Kulkarni. I'm with IBM, and today I'm going to talk about the integration of IBM Information Server with Apache Atlas. So that's going to be the talk. IBM has some standard disclaimers. Basically, our plans are subject to change. So that's something that I'm required to share with you. When you go with your data journey, you want to focus on three things: knowing your data, trusting your data, and using your data. So that's how we visualize the unified governance and integration portfolio that we have at IBM. Knowing your data is more focused on discovery, and there's a lot of talk about this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Trusting your data is more focused on lineage and how you ensure the quality of the data. And using your data is how do you derive business value out of the data that you have. What we provide in the IBM Information Server portfolio is a set of powerful tools that can help you achieve that. So the Information Governance Catalog is a tool that IBM provides for cataloging your technical metadata and assigning business language to it. We provide data quality that helps you with cleansing and standardization, and data integration that is massive movement of data at scale. All of this is built on top of a common connectivity layer, shared metadata across the board, and also security. This also is running on a common execution engine as well. We, of course, support GDPR, so that's one of the key things that's provided in the portfolio. And we handle both structured and unstructured data. So all of that stuff is available for you as part of this portfolio. So let's talk about your governed data lake. And there have been many representations of this, and the previous two speakers also touched on it. But I'm just going to put a little spin on how we do this differently at IBM. So on the left side, you have your enterprise IT assets with your system of records, engagement, and automation. On your right are your consumers of that data. So those are your personas, the analytics teams that you have, the line of business users, and your compliance teams and officers that are required to provide reports. In the middle is your data pipeline. So what we do here in IBM is a lot of focus is on machine learning and automating a lot of the tasks that today are manual. So it starts with the automatic discovery of your data. You move to classification. So that is dark data that may be out there that you don't even know about. You then do classification of your data and term assignments to make sure your technical metadata is matched to your business. And then auto data profiling and quality of that data. We do have a lot of workflows that help you with curation and stewardship. And eventually that data lands into your data catalog, which is now made available to the enterprise. And along the way, you have rules and policies that are enforced. So you define these governance objectives, rules, and policies, and they're enforced by that pipeline. And then, of course, you have a way to measure and monitor what you're doing to make sure that that data is exactly what you need. Apache Atlas is our open metadata and governance services. Obviously, you have the ability to manage types, entities, classifications. You have lineage capabilities in there. And then there are two ways essentially to work with Atlas. And the reason I bring that up is that's what we'll be using as part of our demo in a little while. So you have the REST API interface and you have messaging via Kafka. So similarly on the IBM Enterprise Search and the governance catalog side, we have rich enterprise search capability where you can start to search with assets using keywords, relationships, ratings, and visualize this in a graphical fashion. And then on the governance catalog, which is the foundation, a part of it, it helps you store all of those assets in the catalog, as well as associate different assets using terms. And I'm going to give you a little demo with one of the terms and how that gets interchanged with Atlas as we move forward. So the integration of IBM Information Server with Atlas, we use the 0.8 release of Atlas. On your left is your Apache Atlas repository with Kafka and APIs. And on the right is your information server, which also has REST APIs and a Kafka interface. And it has your catalog and the knowledge graph in it as well. So what we deliver as part of the capability is an Atlas IGC connector that you can get from IBM. And that listens to the different Kafka queues and leverages the APIs to move that data between the two metadata catalogs. So in terms of the details, for the core capabilities, we support Hive tables as well as terms. And then from a deployment standpoint, what you do is you download this little connector and you configure it to point it to the Hadoop distribution as well as the information server, and then you're on your way to run this on both sides. The Apache Atlas 1.0 integration is also in plan for us that is going to be available in Q4. That's again a plan. And we plan to support a lot more asset types as we move forward. So let's look into the demo. So what I'm going to do is create a new database in Hive with a table and a column. So we'll demonstrate that the asset shows up in both IGC as well as in Atlas. And then create a new term and assign that term to the asset that we just created, and also show that they're reflected, and then we'll search the asset. So I don't have enough time to go into full-blown capabilities that are available as part of the core platform, but I think it gives you enough idea of how we're serious about the Hadoop ecosystem and how the tools that we have in the portfolio work with what is available as part of the ecosystem. So let's jump into this little demo here. So I'm just going to so what you're looking at is the governance catalog from IBM, and it's a rich set of capabilities. I'm just going to show you that the data resources that are available in IGC and Atlas at the moment, they don't show the new one that I'm about to create. So let's go ahead and create one. So we're going to go to Hive and create a very simple database with a table called account info, and it has just one column, which is customer ID. So let's go ahead and run that and create that particular asset. So the asset has been created, so I can go back to Atlas, and if I refresh, obviously the asset shows up there, so I can just drill down very quickly and show you that I'm not lying here, and there is the asset right there with the column information. And so let's go back now to the information server governance catalog and refresh it, and again, the asset that was just created in Hive now magically also shows up on the governance catalog side. So you can see that I have the account info and I have the customer ID. So the next thing I'm going to look at is a term. So a term is a way for you to specify what certain information about that particular asset. So here I'm going to just call it new customer ID and then assign it to a category, which is the catalog. So let's go ahead and save that in the information server governance catalog here. And once I refresh it, I can see that the term is now appearing as part of the governance catalog, which is where we created it, so nothing new there. But if I go now into Atlas and I refresh the catalog and the terms under Atlas, then I can see that the new term, which is the customer ID, is now created in Atlas. So if I click on this, nothing yet is associated with that term, and so I can now go back to the governance catalog here and go to the table, the account info, and I can now start to associate that term with the asset. So here I'm going to go ahead and edit and just associate the term that we created with that particular asset. So here I'm going to type in the new customer ID and make sure that it's assigned and just go ahead and save. So once I save this, when I go back to Atlas here, I can see that particular asset, which is the new customer, if I go click on that, and look at the tables, I can see that the term has now been associated with it. So this is a term that originated in the governance catalog, and I can see that the term is now showing up here. So the last piece of this is, let's just very quickly look at the enterprise search and see the term that we just created. So here I have the new customer ID, and I can see that the term is associated with the catalog and the table, as you see it here. And this is really the last 10 seconds of my demo. I know that where time is up. And now I can go into account info, which is one of the table that I have, and I can see that I have the table associated with the schema column and the term. So this essentially concludes my demo part here. So what we have shown is essentially an integration between the IBM Information Server and Apache Atlas. More to come, surely, but we're very serious about this, and we're moving forward with it. And again, a few more disclaimers from IBM that we cannot reproduce or transmit any of this information. So thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed this demo and this session.
Thanks, everyone. I think time is up. So one of the things that they showed here from the IBM side, we want to make sure that you have a preview into this. There is a talk later today on ODPI by the Linux Foundation. So they will be showcasing some of the open metadata work that we're doing jointly with IBM. So please do attend that talk and also look at what we're doing, which was referenced here on Apache 1.0, Atlas 1.0 capabilities. Thanks, everyone.